the digitization of our day-to-day existence, for better or worse, I think is definitely mineral intensive. The problem is not so much the behavior of one single company. It's a systemic issue. You have poverty, forced labor, child labor, etc. So it's not just one company that's going to solve that. You need a systemic approach, and that's what's missing sometimes. Transparency can go a long way, but then you also need to provide like tangible alternatives on the ground to improve the lives of workers and their communities.
Welcome to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we chat with energy experts from all around the world. We exchange on timely energy issues as well on their life experience. You will learn a lot, whether you're an energy aficionado or a newbie. It's October 20, 2021, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today, I'm exchanging with Antoine Heuty, founder of Ulula, a software company that allows workers in the mining industry, as well as other sectors, to alert their employers about unsafe working conditions. Ulula is at the crossroads of supply chain, ESG, mining, and data. And we are going to discuss each of these pieces today in the podcast. Hi, Antoine.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. And it seems you're at the core of the action because everybody today is talking about supply chain, ESG. Mining is a big piece of the energy transition, and data. You're gathering, I guess, a lot of data with all the information you have. So tell us a little bit about how Lula is positioning itself with the mining industry. We know, and the International Energy Agency released a report recently that decarbonization will require even more of those minerals, such as lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, rare earths, or aluminium, because solar plants, wind power, but also like the EVs, electrical vehicles, like batteries, we need even more of those materials. So it seems that there is going to be even more stress on the supply chain. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think beyond. I mean, the projection and the forecast for the demand for these minerals is pretty clear, and the security and stability of supply, I think, is going to be a critical political, economic, and social a challenge for all the players involved and all the communities and workers that are in these supply chains. And I think that if anything, COVID is not specific to the critical supply chain you mentioned, but I think the disruptions caused by COVID are giving us a real time and very serious example of what happens when these supply chains are broken and when other supply chains are broken. And
so can you tell us a little bit, what does it look like, a supply chain in the mining industry, from the extraction to the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, so the peculiarity of the mining supply chain is that some of it is industrial, and obviously it's dominated by giants like Rio Tinto, BHP, Anglo American, Barrick, and others. But there is a significant amount of the mining industry that's also artisanal and small scale, where you have 30 million artisanal miners around the world. So it's a lot more dependent from these industries, and so while they may not generate the majority of the outputs, they are very significant players. They've been there very often before these large industrial players came in, and they typically stay there after the large industrial deposits are mined. And it's very important to, I think, what's at stake here, because the conflicts that may arise from having access to concessions and the consequences, the environmental and social consequences of the presence of both large, small, and the interaction as players tends to be something that can disrupt the supply chain, and can determine the outcomes both from a business standpoint as well as from a social perspective. So you have them at the beginning, and then you have a fairly complex supply chain. I mean, you have traders that are buying these these minerals, from very small traders to large one like Trafigura or obviously Glencore, that play a critical role and sometimes are more integrated with the mining assets, as well. Uh, and then there are shipped. I think so. It does have affect number of other supply chains. We know the cost of shipping has gone up, so that's affecting a number of energy players as well. Where getting the minerals from the point of extraction to the point of processing in factories in China or elsewhere is a major challenge at the moment. And then after, I think, you enter into large supply chains of minerals, of electronics, like all the telephones that we like to use.
Yeah.
But I mean, they are really ubiquitous to our lives, as you've said, and clearly the digitization of our day-to-day existence, for better or worse, I think is definitely mineral intensive.
Yeah. And so in your work, you're focusing a lot on the social dimension of ESG and looking at the conditions of workers. And are you focusing mostly on the extracting piece of the supply chain, or also other areas of maybe human right violations during the supply chain? Or you were mentioning COVID. I know that for the shipping industry, COVID has really made some conditions worse for crew members because of delays in the rotations, unpaid crew members. I mean, you hear different stories around the shipping side, but I was wondering if you're seeing most of the social vulnerabilities of the mineral supply chain at the extraction, or it's happening elsewhere also?
Well, I think sadly, the social abuse. I mean, whether looking at it from a labor or human rights perspective, is ubiquitous. I mean, there's an estimated 26 million modern slaves, so people who are living in condition of modern slavery. So the question is not whether there is such thing happening both at the point of extraction in the shipping industry and elsewhere. It's really like it's a matter of how hard you look at the supply chain before you find some very troubling social labor performance. And what the way we interact with that is we're trying to shed light on that, not from just a perspective of advocacy. I mean, it's really trying to intervene in this so that change can happen. I mean, there's a number of reports that come out on a regular basis from very large NGOs like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty on some of these issues. And so clearly, the shipping industry, the fishing industry, the conditions on vessels, on shipping boats is one that is highly vulnerable to abuse. And so we do work on some of those as well. But I mean, really, the point of what we do is trying to take the perspective of those that are most directly involved in the supply chain or at risk. I mean, the way we work is that we use mobile phones to ask directly and anonymously to workers or community members. I think we do work with communities as well, whether things are going okay or not, and we also let them blow the whistle or raise a grievance in their preferred channel. So whether you're illiterate and you only have access to an old, dumb phone from the 2000s, or you have a fancy smartphone and you want to do that with an app or with WhatsApp. So the idea is being able to do that on a global scale, irrespective of the communication channel and your language, and do that in a way that is safe, so anonymized and automated. I mean, we're collecting data from thousands of people. I mean, we've collected data like from about 1.5 million people. So that's you can't just have people calling each other, and that's not very practical or cost effective, and very burdensome. So we do that on a continuous basis, and that's a better foundation in our view to understand what is really going on in a workplace, than sending some in the traditional ways you would send someone once every so often to find out whether there are issues. And of course there is a lot of value in sending someone, but if you do that once every so often, I mean, you're missing the point. It's just a snapshot in time, and even if irrespective of how good you are as a person, and that's the limitation. And there are many places where, especially during COVID, nobody has been able to access to, and so we are really trying to move the needle in this sense, because we can go everywhere.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. You mentioned like the fact that the technology you're using for those kind of whistleblowers is anonymous and private. But I'm wondering in countries like China, for example, or other, countries that are restraining, freedom of expression or might silence workers, or some workers might be afraid of being, they might scare for their life or maybe retaliations. Like, how do they feel safe enough to communicate with you?
Yeah, I mean, one should never like be illusioned to the fact that a technology is just a tool. I mean, it's not doesn't guarantee the outcomes, but the responsibility that we have as a technology provider is to meet the minimum standards to not put people at greater risk. So we are encrypting all the data. We are not using certain channels that we know are open books for some governments. So we exercise due diligence in how we look at the privacy of the users. And our business model is not based on selling any personal identifiable information. It's the cornerstone of what we do is to keep private. I mean, first is to minimize the amount of personal identifiable information we collect, and to never use it for any other purpose than the one that we have decided to. So, which is consistent with the GDPR legislation in Europe, and it's not just a matter of being in line with the regulators. It's all that we do is based on trust. So gaining the trust is really fundamental to being successful. And so we do everything we can to gain that trust. So that's a tech element. But then after it, you need the tool is implemented by a range of partners, and they are lending their legitimacy to it as well. And that's so I think you're able to get uptake from workers, because they know that if you're reporting something, it's not just that you won't get retaliated against, it's that some good will come out of that, right? I mean, that's the minimum you would expect, that you will get meaningful remedy out of that. And so, so the tool
Like
is just
improved conditions for them, right?
exactly, yeah. You may be
Hmm.
harassed. I mean, maybe you've been like unfairly. I've had unfair deductions on your salary, or there's been harassment, or maybe you've been discriminated against because people thought you were coming from a COVID region or something like that. We found many things like that. So, what sort of remedy you can provide? And here we are the infrastructure that enables the communication to happen in a safe manner, the data to record whether you have a positive or negative impact. But obviously, the action needs to be taken by the employers, by third parties, by a number of other actors in the ecosystem, and there's no magic in that sense, right?
Yeah. So, in terms of vulnerabilities in the supply chain of minerals, there is a lot of emphasis on the concentration. It's a few countries like China or Congo. But another vulnerability seems to be the conditions of the workers. And how can we improve that so that the supply chain is less vulnerable? Is it a matter of best practices or ranking the companies or the suppliers? Like, what do you think is the next step?
I think there's a number of efforts that already exist in terms of ranking, the governance profile of countries. There is also, I think, a responsible mineral index that also looks at how companies are disclosing what degree of transparency they have in the way they manage, resources. Um, I think one of the things that I don't know that it's missing, but it's yeah, because it's a very difficult thing to do is if you look at cobalt in DRC, as you said, it's a obviously it's a major point for the industry and for the global economy as a whole. And the problem is not so much the behavior of one single company; it's a systemic issue. You have child labor that is fairly developed there. You should not paint it in a more horrible picture than it is, but it is a systemic issue that's prevalent there. You have forced labor where a lot of workers are not making enough, even to make ends meet, and so poverty, forced labor, child labor, etc. So it's not just one company that's going to solve that. You need a systemic approach, and so you have efforts that are multi-stakeholder in nature, like the Global Battery Alliance, that bring together private sector, government, NGOs together, so that you try to provide alternatives and that are that are they make business sense, not just moral sense. Obviously, nobody can accept and tolerate child labor, but it's uh, obviously the parents are not putting their children to work because they are bad parents. They have very often no choice and they're not given alternatives. So how do we work with everybody's comparative advantage to make that happen? And we are
Mhm.
involved in some of these efforts, and that's what's missing sometimes. Is transparency can go a long way, but then you also need to provide like really tangible alternatives on the ground for to improve the lives of workers and their communities.
Yeah. And from the perspective of end consumers, do you think like the user of the lithium battery is aware of those issues? I know like in the steel industry or in the natural gas industry for example, for now there is consumer pressure for responsible sourced gas or responsible sourced steel. Is it something you see from the end consumers for the minerals or not yet?
I think there's a number of efforts again that are similar to that. There's responsible steel, there's responsible aluminum initiative. So you have a lot of efforts. I think
Mhm. But those
the
labels are like universally, there is an agreement, or it's still like a process.
I mean, they are not just in on paper. They are implemented. I think the question is always, the degree to which they are easy to understand, whether they are credible on all fronts. And I'm not going to make comments on one or the other, but I think it's the we don't lack standards at the moment. I think there's, if anything, consumers can get easily lost by standards because who am I to choose between standard A and B on one thing or the other. The problem at this in our view is that it's what's underneath that logo of fair something, fair aluminum, fair cobalt, or etc. Is, can you really trust that this is conveying the sort of information that you're comfortable with? Can you understand it as a consumer? You're not supposed to be an expert on lithium, and can it be a good guidance for you to make informed consumption choices? And I think that's, again, I think there are interesting things to both make the information more robust, but also make it more accessible and understandable by average consumers.
You mentioned a few examples of, social issues for workers, being less paid or human right abuses. How does that impact communities when it's white, like some of those mine are the main activity in one town or one region? How does it impact like a whole community when there are some issues?
Yeah, I mean, uh, quite a bit of our work is actually focused on the social license, so more on the how the company interact with its stakeholders. And obviously the workers are not living on a outside the community. They are often in the community or living in the community. So when you are not treating your workers in a fair manner, that's obviously going to destroy some of the capital that you may have won through a very long time. So it's, as always, the reputation is takes a long time to build, and it's very easily destroyed. Now, the consequences for mining companies can be quite dire because we know a number of assets have to go through yeah, costly and sometimes very painful conflicts with communities, either as a result of workers that may be experiencing some accidents and at least a perception that this could have been avoided, um, and sometimes because there are other actions based on usage of water or dust or management of tailings, etc. I mean, there are many. You see, the industry has such a footprint on the communities that there are many ways that are many material issues. I think for a mining company at the local level. So the question, I mean, is how does a company stay aware of that? How do they get the pulse of the community, the pulse of their workers, so that they can act and have early warning signals that their position may be at risk? Because the situation where you have a mine that's blocked and a supply chain that is then at risk is never a good outcome, certainly for the business, which is losing millions of dollars every day, but it's not a good outcome for the communities either. It's a very dangerous situation. It's also taking money out of the pockets of the community in so many other ways. So it's a lose-lose proposition. But the fact that you don't have a social dialogue and ways of having feedback between the communities, the workers, the companies, is where we think we can improve the situation as Lula, and where we've seen outcomes being changed in practice.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's critical. Did you see some success stories with social media where it enabled, has like the fact to communicate through social media, I don't know, post pictures or relate stories, maybe have been like acted as a force of change, like by improving conditions for workers?
I think the role of social media is, I mean, it's ambivalent, I would say. I mean,
Yeah, not
it's
just
been
in
a,
this sector, by the way, we'll see it everywhere, right?
sure, yeah, yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
everywhere. I think it's, yeah, the social media can amplify the voices and the causes of many people. Um, it's also magnifies certain voices within the communities. And I think what we try and do is to try to understand what's the opinion, what are the silent majority thinking, because um,
That's very
it's quite
interesting.
yeah, it's quite easy to have, let's say, an anti-mining group versus a group that is sponsored directly or indirectly by mining interests, to just try to be the loudest voice in the room. And I mean, that's probably fair game and usual business, but that's not necessarily providing you very interesting information as to what is really going on in the community. What are women, children, youth, indigenous groups thinking about that, because they are probably not part of that. And just on as a raw, I mean, as a reminder, 50% of the world is still offline. So you have lots of people that are there, but it's not necessarily inclusive. So you have to I think, yeah, use these channels, use the information that's there, but you also need to put it in perspective.
Great. Well, let's move to your personal trajectory, Antoine. So you went through the path of entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a little bit how did that happen, and were you an entrepreneur at heart from the beginning?
So I mean, I am not a natural born entrepreneur. I think I mean I am uh, I mean in the beginning of the middle age. I don't know how you want to frame that, but I didn't start Lula when I was 20 something, just out of college. I mean, I came to it after having spent time in the United Nations systems, in the management consulting, in philanthropy, and thinking that being on the ground and realizing that I think the experiences that I gathered really pushed me to try to do something that would, in my view, be more tangible, and that would also bring about the different lessons that I'd learned from working in these organizations and being confronted with these issues. So I would say entrepreneurship came when I was I don't know, still hopefully at the peak or close to the peak of my productivity, but having also enough experience under my belt to really frame a project and be able to lead it, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, you felt confident enough maybe to have the expertise behind you in the fields that mining, social work,
Hmm.
NGOs.
Yeah, definitely.
And what about your studies? Do you think it was useful? Like you studied international affairs. We actually both studied at Sciences Po. You also have a degree from Columbia. But do you feel it was useful, the field of international affairs?
I mean, obviously, given the field that we work in, I mean, it's a very useful conceptual and analytical framework that I think the problems we're trying to solve, they are fascinating, because they are not just economics, they're not just politics, they are the intersection of or supply chain and logistics. I mean, they are at the crossroads of many things. And international affairs, I think, for the vagueness that it has, it actually puts you in a good position to deal with that complexity. And so I think in that sense it prepared me. What I think is striking is, though, that when I do speak to students today, they are interested in entrepreneurship career. And when I was at SIPA in Columbia University a while back, let's not put a number, it wasn't something that I would even think about, right? It's not like social entrepreneurship was not on the table.
Yeah, and it seems that post-COVID, there are even more people going into entrepreneurship. So it's a different landscape for workers those days. And what do you think enabled you to become an entrepreneur? Is it networking? Is it different? I think you had investors early on, but do you feel what was the most helpful in your success?
I think it's hard to be an entrepreneur, and the early stages are really merciless. I think, as you and I know. So it's because access to capital, I mean, to financial capital, is always, I think, a really difficult question. What I did have is acquired a lot of social capital and network capital. So I was able to go to the right people. I had enough credentials to make my case and present my proposition to both businesses on the one end and potential financiers of this endeavor on the other end. So that helped me, and I think, yeah, to overcome some of the usual challenges that you have when you want to launch yourself, right?
Yeah, and post-COVID, you moved also, so entrepreneurship is enabling you also to be flexible in the geography, yeah, and be mobile.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess it depends whether your enterprise is selling hardware or in a particular market. But in our case, we are working in 30 countries. Moved from the US to Europe recently, so it's actually closer to, I think, both of my key markets. So I'm quite flexible, and obviously that's an upside of that. Yes.
Yeah. Have you started traveling again for work, or it's still confined?
It's pretty confined because I mean, now I am mostly doing business representation, and so I mean, you can travel in Europe relatively freely as long as you're vaccinated. So there are some things that are opening, but there's a little bit of a catch-22 in the sense that since large businesses that are a majority of our customers are still a little shaky and conservative about that, that means that you still are, I think we're still a few months away from being back to normal.
Great. Well, thank you, Antoine, for sharing your experience and your insight on the mineral supply chains and ESG. I learned a lot, and we'll keep in touch because I think this is not a topic that is going to go away. On the contrary, where you're at the forefront of the action. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Leslie.
That concludes our Energy Vista podcast, which was recorded on October 20, 2011. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day.